Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're doing great and awesome as usual in our daily meetings. Today, we're jumping to the study of language by Geroge Yule because we have unfinished mission to accomplish. And in our topic of today, we're jumping two chapters to chapter 18. Now, why do we skip two chapters? I think because we are following some sort of priority here. We need to focus on the most important and relevant chapters that we do study and focus on and learn from dramatically more than other chapters that we have no direct contact and benefit from. Now, why do I focus on this chapter particularly? It's one of the most important, highly controversial, deeply rooted chapters and one of the key elements of becoming aware as an English speaker and as an English teacher. So futuristically speaking, you need to be aware of the geography of English. Now, how is geography related to English? It's because English is all about geography. It's about distribution of accents and dialects around the world. It's about the preference of certain people to certain dialects over others. So in our chapter of today, which is chapter 18, we're going to focus particularly on that. Now, in this chapter, chapter 18, what we are going to do, we're going to hover over the key features and elements of dialects and accents and isoglosses and language continuum and pidgin and Creole, bilingualism, because these are very common linguistic, social kind of topics that bear high relevance to our study of language, and they are significantly important. Do we say significantly important? Not sure. But the point is language and regional variation. اللغة والتفاوت على أساس المنطقة أو على أساس الرقعة الجغرافية. Now, before we kickstart this chapter, I highly recommend you check out the questions that are distributed at the end. They're left at the end of this chapter because they are going to keep you focused on certain parameters and principles that you need to bear in mind and focus a little bit more on, especially when it comes to the standardization of English and dialects and language in general, accent and dialect, dialectology, which is the study of dialects, regional dialects, isoglosses and dialect boundaries, the dialect continuum, bilingualism. It's often mispronounced word. It's bilingualism. Language planning and pidgin and Creoles. The post-Creole continuum and the study questions in addition to tasks. For teachers, I highly recommend you give students tasks to do more than questions to answer. When you assign them to do tasks, they are going to be able to be in the direct contact with language and with the major principles of language and how they are relevant to society. Throughout this book, we have been talking about language such as English, Spanish, Swahili, as if there are a single variety of each in everyday use. تحدثنا عليهم وكأنما هم single variety, يعني نوع واحد. But that is, we have largely ignored the fact that every language has a lot of variation. كل لغة بيها تفاوت كثير, especially in the way it is spoken. So it's more leaning to spoken variation than to written variation here. التفاوت يكون لفظي أكثر. If we just look at English, we find widespread variation in the way it is spoken in different countries such as Australia, Britain and the US, Canada, عندك New Zealand, Ireland, Scotland. All of these varieties of English are variations of English. Okay, so we keep that in mind. We can also find a range of varieties in different parts of those countries. So when we go to London, they're of course not going to speak the same way people speak English in, for example, Yorkshire or in Manchester. There's a variety of dialects out there and accents and the way they say words. So instead of saying thought, they say thought for the same word. So this accentuated variation is an indicator where people are regionally from, and it's a good indicator that language varies even within the same category of languages. We can also find a range of varieties at different parts of those countries. So geographically speaking, with Lee Tonouchi's account of trick or treat in Hawaii as just one example in this chapter, we have investigated aspects of language variation based on where that language is used as a way of doing linguistic geography, جغرافيا اللغوية. طبعا أنا سافرت، رحت الهواي مدة شهر، بقيت هناك أشتغل في فندق صغير وبنفس الوقت أستكشف المدينة أثناء فترة دراستي الماجستير. اللغة اللوكال اللي يستخدموها هواين يعني تختلف تماما عن اللغة الإنجليزية، وحتى أشكالهم يختلفون. يعني هم مزيج من اليابانيين، يعني تحسهم آسيويين لأنهم قريبين على اليابان، ويعني حتى من الصير التسونامي مات اليابان هم يتأثرون به، تزداد نسبة مناسيب المياه حول الجزيرة اللي هي 7 جزر حقيقة. فالمهم نرجع موضوعنا standard language. بالمناسبة يعني هذا رأيي الشخصي، ماكو شيء اسمه standard language، وإذا أكو فهي تميل لأنه تكون مكتوبة مو متحدث بها، لأنه كل سنة جيل جديد يظهر يتحدث لغة يختلف عن الجيل اللي قبله، فهذا يسبب language variation, generation variation. الأشخاص الكبار بالسن إحنا بنباوع على اللغة، ما نباوع على هيكل ثابت أو تمثال statue، نباوع على نهر يمشي. فأنت من تباوع على النهر across the river you see other nations but this river is flowing، يعني ماكو شيء ثابت، ممكن هيكل اليماتة يتغير، الشكل ماكو ثابت بيه. generations تتبدل the way they speak. We talked about the word and structure of a language in an earlier chapter. We're concentrating on the features of only one variety. احنا ركزنا على variety واحدة chapters السابقة، بس هسه راح نشوفهم usually called the standard language. This is actually an idealized variety. هذه نوعية idealized، يعني ممكن نعتبرها مثالية، بس هو ماكو شيء مثالي حقيقة. هو دا يقول idealized variety because it has no specific region، ما إلها منطقة محددة. It is the variety associated with administrative, commercial and educational centers. بس هذه مكتوبة أكثر مما spoken، متحدث بها. If we think of standard English, it is the version we believe is found in printed مطبوع. English in newspapers and books is widely used in the mass media and is taught in most schools اللي تدرس في أغلب المدارس. It is the variety we normally try to reach and teach to those who want to learn English as a second or foreign language، وحتى بهذه أكو variation اللي تدرس. It's clearly associated with education and broadcasting in public context and is more easily described in terms of the written language, vocabulary, spelling and grammar. هذه هي أكثر شيء تميل لأنه تكون مكتوبة أكثر مما متحدث به، خاصة اللي تدرس في المؤسسات التربوية والتعليمية، حتى يكون بها standardized، حتى يكون نوع من النمط يمشون عليه. If we are thinking of the general variety used in public broadcasting in the United States, we can refer more specifically to standard American English, or in Britain to standard British English. But to be honest, I highly doubt that there is one standard English, because English stems from people who speak English, And those people change, and they change the way they speak. So there is no one single standard criteria on which we can say this is absolutely the best standardized version of English out there. Accents and dialects. Let's move to a very important and juicy, controversial, debatable kind of question, that whether American accent or British accent is more superior than, let's say, other varieties or variations or dialects and accents around the world. But first of all, we need to principally define what accent is and what dialect is. Even though they cross in some point when we talk about this sort of variation. Whether we think we speak a standard variety of English or not, we all speak with an accent. Some accents are good, some accents are bad. It's the personal perception of whether this accent is good or accent is bad. And it's highly controversial topic, actually. It's a myth that some speakers have accents while others do not. Everybody speaks with an accent. Middle Eastern accent, Russian accent. Accent is sometimes good. Accent is sometimes sexy. Accent is sometimes bad when people do not understand you because you have heavy accent. We might feel that some speakers have very distinct or easily recognizable and recognized types of accents, while others may have more subtle يعني دقيق or less noticeable accents, أقل وضوح أو بروز للaccent. But every language user speaks with an accent. Everyone speaks with an accent. Technically, the term accent is restricted to the description of aspects of pronunciation, هذا التعريف, that identify whether an individual speaker is from regional or social status. ممكن طبقة معينة. It's different from the term dialect, which is used to describe features of grammar and vocabulary, as well as aspects of pronunciation. So that's some sort of superficial difference, اختلاف شكلي أو سطحي. We recognize that since you don't know what you're talking about, will generally look the same whether spoken or with an American accent or Scottish accent. Both speakers will be using forms associated with standard English, but have different pronunciation. So the different accentuated pronunciation is going to let us see who is coming from where and from what regional area in some cases. However, this next sense, yidini kinwit here havern about, for example, I don't know how they say that, has the same meaning as the first, but has been written out in an approximation of what a person who speaks one dialect of Scottish English might say. There are differences in pronunciation of wit and about, but there are also examples of different vocabulary like keen and haverin, and a different grammatical form like dini, while differences in vocabulary are often easily recognizable. يعني الاختلافات على مستوى القواعد ممكن قابلية التعرف عليها تكون أسهل. Dialects variation and the meaning of grammatical structure أو التركيبة القواعدية are less frequently documented. أقل توثيقا من بقية الاختلافات الصوتية لأنه نسبة استخدامها راح يكون ضئيل جدا في التفاوت القواعدي. In the following example from Trudgel, two British-speaking visitors, B and C, and a local Irish English speaker, اللي هو A, are involved in a conversation in Donegal, Ireland. How are yous here? Till after Easter. Speaker A looks puzzled. C, we came on Sunday. Yous here a while then. So it seems that the construction, how long are you see here? A's dialect is used with a meaning close to the structure. How long have you been here? How long have you been here? Referring to past time. Speaker B, however, answers as if the question was referring to future time. How long are you going to be here? So you see that's a very distinct difference out there. When speaker C answers with a past time response. Use here to refer to past time. Note that the dialect from use, you plural, use, like books, you use, استخدموها, seems to be understood by the visitors, though it's unlikely to be part of their own dialect. يعني ما حتكون ضمن dialect الخاصة بيهم. نيجي على dialectology, very good example of an interesting part actually. Despite regional difficulties, there's a general impression of mutual intelligibility, تفاهم مشترك أو فهم مشترك among many speakers of different dialects of English, اللهجات المتعددة اللغة الإنجليزية. This is one of the criteria used by the study of dialects, اللي تعتبر dialectology, to distinguish between two different dialects in the same language, اللي نفرق بيناتهم من لهجتين ضمن نطاق اللغة, or parent language, whose speakers can usually understand each other, and two different languages whose speakers can usually understand each other, and there is high level of intelligibility out there. But it's helpful to establish the fact that the different dialects, like each language, is equally worthy of analysis. يعني there is ماكو لهجة أفضل من لهجة أخرى, but لكن أكو لهجة more intelligible, مفهومة أكثر من dialects أخرى أو لهجات أخرى أو حتى accents أخرى. For a social point of view, or from a social point of view, من وجهة نظر اجتماعية, some varieties do become more prestigious. بس هذا شنو؟ هذا personal social perception, اعتمادا على منو الأشخاص وهذولي الأشخاص من أي طبقة اجتماعية. In fact, the variety that develops as the standard language has usually been one socially prestigious dialect, originally associated with the center or economic and political power. القوة الأساسية للديالكت تجي من قوة الاقتصاد الخاص بالمنطقة الجغرافية أو الدولة, العامل الاجتماعي ونسبة dispersion or dispersion اثنينهم صح, of the distribution of that dialects in the world. For example, London is highly perceived as a good standard English because it's the epicenter of the majority of mostly powerful English speakers and rich people in this particular city. Also economic power, center of economy and politics. فأكو politics and economy بالموضوع اللي يخلي لهجة معينة أفضل اجتماعيا من وجهة نظر بعض الأشخاص اجتماعيا من اللهجات الأخرى. Yet there always continue to be other varieties of languages spoken in different regions, and that is a matter of fact, a fact of a matter. Regional dialects. The existence of different regional dialects is widely recognized and often the source of some humor for those living in different regions. دائما يكون هو مصدر مزاح ونكتة لبعض الأشخاص اللي هم من مناطق مختلفة. In the United States, some people from the Brooklyn area in New York may joke about the southern definition of sex by telling you that sex is faux less than 10, in their best imitation of someone from the southern state. In return, Southerners can wonder aloud about what a tree guy is in Brooklyn, since they have heard Brooklyn speakers refer to those tree guys. Some regions' dialects clearly have stereotype pronunciation associated with them. Tree huggers, tree guys ممكن دول الأشخاص اللي يحبون الطبيعة واللي يمنع قطع الأشجار, يسمونهم tree guys. مو الأشخاص اللي هم يعني عبارة عن رجال أشجار أو كذا. Going beyond stereotypes, those involved in the serious investigation of regional dialects have devoted a lot of survey research to the identification of consistent features of speech found in one geographical area compared to another. يعني كثير من البحث أو من البحوث تجير باتجاه إيجاد نمط معين أو في الطريقة معينة للفظ الكلمات، لفظ الأصوات في المناطق الجغرافية المحددة، لأن هذا بالمحصلة النهائية راح يساعدهم على دراسة هذه اللهجة ضمن هذه المنطقة الجغرافية، ضمن هذه الحدود، بطريقة مناسبة وبطريقة تحليلية تمكنهم من الحصول على standardized dialect analysis that will enable them to use it for future sociolinguistic purposes. So speakers, so these dialect survey often involved painstaking attention, يعني اهتمام يعني صعب جدا أو يعني مؤلم إلى درجة أو مكلف أو مرهق إلى درجة عالية, painstaking attention to details, and tend to cooperate and operate with very specific criteria in identifying acceptable inferments. After all, it's important to know if the person whose speech you're recording really is a typical representative of region or dialect. Consequently, the inferments in the major dialect surveys of the 20th century tended to be norms or non-mobile older rural male speakers. هذا الستاندردز هو النورمز مالتهم لأن يعتبرون عنده اكتفاء من الكلمات وعنده خبرة بهذا المجال فراح يعتبروه هو الموديل. So speakers were selected because it was believed that they were less likely to be influenced from outside the regions in their speech. يعني ما لأنهم باقين عمرهم كبير فما راح يتأثرون بالأكسنت والدايلكت من المناطق الأخرى. One unfortunate consequence of using such criteria is that the resulting dialect description tends to be more accurate of a period well before the time of investigation. مشكلة هذا التحليل اللي راح يعتمد على هذول إنه هذول أعمارهم كبيرة في حين إنه المنطقة حديثة فبالتالي الاستخدام مالتهم للغة ما راح يتناسب طرديا ويا المودرنيتي أو حداثة البيانات اللي راح يقدموها. Nevertheless, the detailed information obtained has provided the basis for a number of linguistic atlases. يعني هاي برغم من هذا البيانات اللي قدموها ساهمت في تكوين الأطلس اللغوي أو يعني الدراسة اللغوية الجغرافية لهذه المناطق لإنجلترا والupper Midwest area of the United States, مناطق أعلى الولايات المتحدة والميدوست احنا اللي نسميها اللي قريبة من شيكاغو ونيويورك. نجي على isoglossals and dialect boundaries أو حدود dialects أو حدود اللهجات. We can look at some examples of regional variation found in a survey that resulted in the Linguistic Atlas of the Upper Midwest of the United States. One of the aims of a survey of this type is to find a number of significant differences in speech of those living in different areas and to be able to chart where the boundaries are. هذا واحدة من فوائدهم أنه حتى يكتشفون الحدود اللهجوية لكل منطقة جغرافية in dialect terms between those areas. It is found, for example, that the vast majority الغالبية of informants هم اللي يستقون من عندهم البيانات is one area, say they carry things home from the store in a paper bag, while the majority in other areas say they use paper sack, which is a dialect variation. Then it's usually possible to draw a line across a map separating the two areas as shown on the accompanying illustration. This line is called isogloss. So isogloss is the line and represents a boundary between the areas where with regard to that one particular linguistic term. It is a very similar distribution that is found for another two terms, which is preference for pale to the north and bucket to the south. Pale سطل and bucket. Then another isogloss, probably overlapping the first, it can be drawn in a map. When a number of isoglosses come together in this way, a more solid line indicating a dialect boundary can be drawn, and the accompanying illustration, a small circle indicating whether a paper bag was used in, and a plus sign shows where paper sack used. The broken lines between the two areas represent an isogloss that roughly coincides with line separating several other linguistic features اللي يفصل بعض الخواص اللغوية الأخرى مثل مدى تباعد بالخريطة. فهنا الآيسوغلاس هذا اللي يفصل آيوا عن مينيسوتا ويفصل ساوث داكوتا عن نورث داكوتا. نشوف هنا بعض الأمثلة اللي مستخدمين مثلا بالنورثرن يستخدمون taught بالميدلاند يستخدمون taught. I taught English in high school and I taught English in high school. Roof and roof, creek and creek, greasy and greasy. That's the difference. Midland, they say greasy. Dialect continuum. Another note of caution, ممكن ملاحظة أخرى للتنبيه, is required with regard to dialect boundaries, حدود اللهجات. The drawing of isoglosses and dialects boundaries is quite useful in establishing a broad view of regional dialects حتى يمكننا من أخذ رؤية واسعة عن regional dialects أو اللهجات يعني وتوزيعها حسب المنطقة. But it tends to obscure the fact that most language and dialect boundaries areas, one dialect or language variety merges into another. بسبب أنه بعض الأشخاص من هذه المنطقة يشتغلون بمناطق أخرى فممكن هذا يكون merge. Keeping this in mind, we can view regional variation as existing along a dialect continuum rather than as having a sharp break from one region to another. A very similar type of continuum can occur with related languages existing on either side of political border. على الحدود السياسية ممكن بين المناطق. Can occur with related to language existing on one side of a political border. As you travel from Holland in Germany into Germany, you will find a concentration of Dutch speakers, تركيز من المتحدثين باللغة الهولندية, giving way to areas near the borders where Dutch may sound more likely Deutsch, because the Dutch dialects and the German dialects are less clearly differentiated and they are merging. مثل لاحظ المصلاويين ممكن مهتمين ومتركز اهتمامه باللغة التركية والقريبين من حدود سوريا يتحدثون باللغة السورية تكاد تبتعد عن اللهجة العراقية. Speakers who move back and forth across the borders area using different varieties with some ease may be described as bidialectal, يعني يتحدثون ثنائيي اللهجة, speaking two dialects. Most of us grew up with some form of bidialectalism. احنا يعني speaking one dialect in the street among family and friends and having to learn another dialect in school. إذا أنت جاي من محافظة أخرى تدخل بغداد مثلا تتحدث بلكنة بغداد نوعا ما, أو بالغربية وجاي بغداد أو بالشمال وجاي بالبصرة, فعلى هذه الشاكلة. In some places there are different languages used in the street and in school, where we can talk about people knowing two distinct languages. We describe them as bilingual. Bilingual are people who speak two languages or more. Two languages specifically. Bilingualism and diglossia. In many countries, regional variation is not simply a matter of two or more dialects of one single language. بعض البلدان, بعض المناطق حقيقة هي المسألة أعقد من أنه تكون مسألة لهجتين, but can involve two or more quite distinct and different languages. يعني بيهم أكثر من لغة. Canada, for example, was a bilingual country. Justin Trudeau speaks French and English. As an official bilingual country with both French and English as official language, this recognition of the linguistic right of the country's French-speaking speakers, largely in Quebec, they speak French, did not come about without a political upheaval. يعني صارت أكو ما صار هذا الموضوع بدون ثورة سياسية. For most of its history, Canada was essentially an English-speaking country with a French-speaking minority group. على امتداد التاريخ كانت كندا تتحدث اللغة الإنجليزية ووجود يعني أقلية من الفرنسيين. In such situation, bilingualism at that level of individual tends to be a feature of the minority group. فأنا كانت الفرنسية هي لغة الأقلية. In this form of bilingualism, a member of minority group grows up in one linguistic community, يعني ينضج أو ينشأ في مجتمع لغوي يتحدث لغة واحدة, ممكن British, Welsh in Britain, Spanish in the United States, هذول minority, via the language of minority. but learns another language, English, in order to take part of the larger dominant linguistic community. لازم يتعلم الدومينانت language حتى يكون عضو أو جزء فعال من هذا linguistic community أو هذا المجتمع اللغوي. Individual bilingualism, however, doesn't have to be the result of political domination. ممكن هو مو سببه هو الهيمنة السياسية by a group using a different language. It can simply be the result of having two parents who speak different languages. ممكن أبوكم وأمك يتحدثون لغتين مختلفات. If a child simultaneously acquire the French spoken by her mother and the English spoken by her father, this is bilingualism. أو أكو bilingualism بأنواع اللي هو simultaneous synchronic bilingualism, أكو delayed bilingualism يمكن يكتسبها فترة أخرى. There will simply be two ways of talking talking to the person being talked to. However, even in this type of bilingualism, one language tends eventually to become the dominant one. And of course, you need an operating system language where it dominates your daily communication and your speech, and that is using English, of course. With the other is a subordinate role, إلها دور تبعي. A rather special situation involving two distinct varieties of English called diglossia or diglossia in some occasions. Exists in some countries. In diglossia, there is a low variety acquired locally and used for every affairs, and a high or special variety learned in school and used for important matters. So a type of diglossia يعني وحدة للاستخدامات اليومية للسوق وكذا، وحدة للاستخدامات الدراسية والمهام الأكثر أهمية بالمدرسة. A type of diglossia exists in Arabic-speaking countries where the high variety اللي هي classic Arabic اللي هي اللغة الأمسية احنا نسميها modern standard Arabic اللي نستخدمها بالمراسلات الرسمية بالحديث بالجو الأكاديمي، وعندنا هذا الإيراكي dialect اللي احنا نستخدمها low variety اللي هي a version of Arabic but spoken majorly in the most regions of the country in Iraq. The low variety is the local version of the language, such as Egyptian Arabic or Lebanese Arabic, through a long period of or Iraqi Arabic. A diglossic situation exists with Latin as the high variety and one of the local languages in Europe, for example, French, Spanish, Italian, as the low variety. في فترة من الفترات كانت اللغة الإسبانية هي لهجة من اللهجات من تفرعات اللهجة اللاتينية، بعدين أخذت استقلاليتها وصارت لغة بحد ذاتها. هذا ما أعرف معلومة تعرفوها لو لا. الإسبانية كانت لهجة لاتينية من اللهجات اللاتينية، شلون العراقية من اللهجة العربية من اللغة العربية، بعدين أخذت شكلها النهائي. perhaps هسه language planning التخطيط اللغوي ممكن نسميه perhaps بعض المناطق يلفظونها perhaps or perhaps, because bilingualism is contemporary in contemporary Europe and North America tends to be found mostly among minority groups. لأنه ثنائية اللغة موجودة يعني غالبية عند المناطق الأقليات. Many countries are often assumed to be monolingual. كثير من الدول يعتبرون أحادي اللغة. For many of those residents who are only capable of speaking one language, English, the United States would indeed seem to be a monolingual country. For others, it's clearly not, because they live in large communities where English is not the first language, of whom, as an example, the majority of population in San Antonio in Texas will be more likely to listen to radio broadcasts in Spanish than in English. Texas كانت جزء من المكسيك، هي ونيو مكسيكو كاليفورنيا كانت مقاطعات مكسيكية أخذتهم الولايات المتحدة، صاروا جزء من الولايات المتحدة. ممكن الشخص اللي هو بايلينغوال يتحدث اللغتين بنفس الكفاءة، ماكو أي إشكال. Consider a similar context of Guatemala, a country in Central America, where there are 26 Mayan languages spoken. أكو 26 لغة من الماين، اللغة المائية يمكن تسميها بالعربي، as well as Spanish. إضافة للإسبانية. In this situation, Spanish is selected as the language of education. تدرس الإسبانية على لغة التعليم. Other Mayans اللي تعتبر low variety ممكن إلها disadvantage هنا. Questions of this type require answers on the basis of some type of language planning. يعني لازم هذه الأسئلة تجاب من قبل الحكومة على أساس أنه شنو التخطيط اللغوي اللي موجود هنا. Government, legal and educational organizations in many countries have to plan which variety of or varieties of language spoken in the country are to be used for official businesses. احنا هسه مثلا عندنا بالرابع اعدادي يدرس اللغة الكردية، فهذا جزء من سياسة الدولة لموازنة الطيف اللغوي اللي موجود بالبلد لتمكين المجتمع من الاندماج بطريقة أفضل عن طريق التفاهم المشترك باستخدام اللغة. فهذا يتطلب بالمؤسسات الحديثة بالمجتمعات الناجحة الاعتماد على language planning أو سياسة تخطيط لغوي تمكنهم من الحصول على نسبة متكافئة نوعا ما من الاستخدام لأكثر من لغة اللي موجودة بالمجتمع. In India, the choice was Hindi, yet in many non-Hindi speaking regions, there were riots against this decision. For example, there were national language wars. In the Philippines, before different groups could agree on the name of the national language, Filipino. لأنه أكو هواية varieties ممكن يحسون بالضيم أو بالظلم أنه ما تعتبر هي dialect أو يعني standard language spoken. The process of language planning may seem in a better be seen in a better light when the full series of stages is implemented over a number of years. ممكن ترى الضوء على من خلال تطبيقها على عدة سنين. The adoption of Swahili as a national language of Tanzania in East Africa may serve as a good example. هنا مثلا السواحلية بتنزانيا اللي بدأت تستخدم على مدى بعيد من السنين حد ما قدروا يخلوها هي الofficial. There still exists a large number of other languages as well as the colonial vestiges of English. But the educational, legal and government systems have gradually introduced Swahili as the official language. مثل ما تلاحظ احنا عندنا بالعراق الكتب الرسمية ممكن تضاف إلها اللغة الكردية أو بالكفر مات الهوية الوطنية. The process of selection choosing an official language is followed by codification, in which basic grammars, dictionaries and written models are used to establish the standard varieties. وهي تتطلب مطابع ودراسات ضمن القاموس. The process of elaboration follows with the standard variety being developed for use in all aspects of social life and the appearance of body of literature work written in the standards. إضافة لوجود إنتاج أدبي يكتب على هذه الشاكلة. بعدين عندنا التنفيذ. أوكي فهسه عندنا codification حتى يسوون language planning أكو 3 stages. Codification, elaboration and implementation أو التنفيذ is largely a matter of government attempts to encourage use of the standard, and acceptance is the final stage when a substantial majority of the population have come to use the standard. وهي تتطلب سنين كثيرة. سياسة الفرنسة مثلا اللي طبقت في بعد الاحتلال الفرنسي لمصر أو يعني الدول اللي احتلتهم بغرب الوطن العربي ممكن تعتبر هي نوع من language planning لفرض اللغة الفرنسية بدل اللغة الإنجليزية. الموضوع الآخر المهم جدا هو pigeons and creoles. In some areas the standard chosen may be a variety than original had no native speakers in the country. For example, in Papua New Guinea, a lot of official business is conducted in Tok Pisin. This language is now used by over 1 million people. But it began many years earlier as a kind of contact language called Pidgin. فشنو Pidgin? Pidgin is a variety of a language that developed for some practical purposes such as trading. يعني هي variety of a language، هي تفرع من اللغة يستخدم لأغراض التجارة والتفاهم المشترك، شغلات تطبيقية لها علاقة بالتواصل بين شخصين ما يتحدثون نفس اللغة. زين. But who did not know each other's languages اللي احنا ذكرتهم. As such, it would have no native speakers. هي ما بيها native speakers، يعني ماكو جيل ناشئ يتحدث بيها. هو مجرد دول الناس ضمن فئة معينة يستخدموها practical purposes لأغراض practical مثلا trading, business، حتى يمكنون إنه ما يعرف واحد اللغة الثانية. So the origin of the term or the word pigeon is thought to be from a Chinese version of the English word business. Pigeon هي نوع من business word. A pigeon is described as an English pigeon if English is the lexifier language. That is, شنو lexifier? The main source of words in the pigeon. Lexifier جاء من lexicography اللي هو مصدر المفردات اللي هو قاموس أو دراسة القواميس. lexicographic word. بعدين lexifier هي اللغة اللي تشتق من عند هذه الكلمات. يعني مثلا المنطقة التجارية بين إيران والعراق بها ناس هم عراقيين وناس إيرانيين يتواصلون بلغة pigeon، بس هاي البيجن منين الكلمات مالتها تجي أكثر شيء من الإيراني؟ إذا من الإيراني فهي يسموها lexifier. الإيرانيان هي lexifier. إذا من العراقي أكثر فهي إراكي يعتبر lexifier. فالفكرة وين؟ الفكرة أنه ياها اللغة الدوميننت، بس هاي يحتاجها دراسة حتى يعددون الكلمات ويشوفون ياها الdistribution مالتهم أكثر. The word grass, for example, has its origin in the English word grass, but in Tuk-Pisin, it also came to be used as hair. It is part of moss grass or mustache, and grass belong fez or fez, اللي هي beard. There are several English pigeons still used today. أكو هواية تستخدم هذه الفترة. They are characterized by absence of many complex grammatical morphology. طبعا هذه البيجن يعني بيها خاصية أنه هواية من grammatical features, morphological features أو الخواص الاشتقاقية ضمن نطاق القواعد ما موجودة. Limited vocabulary، عدد محدود من الكلمات. Inflection suffixes such as s, missed, possessive s or noun standards English are rare in pigeons. يعني كليتها محذوفة. While structures like to buck, two books معناها, and the gal place, the girl's place, are common. Functional morphemes often take the place of inflectional morphemes. Functional morphemes هي اللي تحمل المعنى أكثر من الحفاظ على التركيبة القواعدية باستخدام الانفlection. Found in the source language. For example, instead of changing the form of you to your as an English phrase, your book, English-based pigeon, use like belong and change the word in order to produce phrases like book belong you, كتاب يخصك. Syntax of pigeon can be quite unlike the language from the term where borrowed or modified, or the lexified language. Can also be seen in this example from the earliest stage of Tuk-Pisin. Bayamba, head, belong, you, right, gain. شوفها اطلع عليها. There are believed to be 6 to 12 million people still using Pidgin languages, and between 10 and 17 million using descendants from Pidgin called Creoles. ليش Creole شنو فرق عن Pidgin؟ When a pigeon develops beyond its role as a trade، من تتطور هذه البيجن وتأخذ مجال أوسع من التجارة حتى تصير لغة contact بين الناس، becomes the first language of social community، تصير اللغة الأساسية للمجتمع. It is described as Creole. فهذا تعريف Creole. Tuk-Pisin is now a Creole لأنه الجيل الجديد بدأ يستخدمها بعد مفهوم التجارة، although still locally referred to as Pidgin. The language spoken by a large number of people in Hawaii is called Creole. Technically from Hawaii's Creole English. يعني اللي جاية من عندها الأساسية. A Creole initially develops as the first language of the children growing up in a pidgin-using community and become more complex as serves more communicative purposes لأنه بدأت تخدم أغراض تواصلية أكثر خارج إطار التجارة. Thus, unlike Pidgin, Creole have large number of native speakers and are not restricted at all in their use. فبيجن Creole بيها community بيها native speakers, Pidgin ما بيها native speakers. A French Creole is spoken by the majority of the population in Haiti, and English Creole are used in Jamaica and Sierra Leone. The separate vocabulary elements of a Pidgin can become grammatically elements in Creole. The form bayan by you go, by and by you go is early to Pidgin, gradually shortened of by you go. Finally, to you be go, with a grammatic structures not unlike that of English translation, you will go. اللي معنى مالتها. The post-Creole continuum هسه نجي. In many contemporary situations, بعض المواقف الحديثة اللي يعني تشترك بها Creole, there's usually evidence of another process at work. أكو دليل على أنه أكو فد عملية أخرى تصير. شنو هذه العملية؟ Just as there was development from a Pidgin to a Creole known as creolization. شنو creolization? There is now often a retreat from the use of the Creole by those who have greater contact with a standard variety of the language. زين الفرايتي مالت اللانجوج لنفترض انه هذولي الجيل الجديد اتعلم الكريول اللي اكتسبها من البيجن مال العائله مالتهم مثلا او ضمن المنطقه التجاريه، بعدين احتكوا باللغه اللي احنا نعتبرها مثلا هسه دول المنطقه التجاريه بين ايران والعراق. جو الجيل الجديد مالتهم وبدأوا صارت عندهم مدارس، والمدارس تدرس اللغه العربيه، فهنا راح يصير شنو؟ راح يتاثرون باللغه العربيه الفصيحه مثلا. Education and greater social prestige are associated with a higher variety اللي هي تعتبر higher variety أو اللغة الأعلى، التركيبة الأعلى. مثلا British English and Jamaica. Jamaica عندهم Creole، فهذه يسمونها variety of British English. A number of speakers will tend to use fewer Creole forms and structures. هذه تسمى decreolization. فمثل ما احنا لاحظنا الكريوليزيشن اللي هو انتقال البيجن الى كريول عن طريق الجيل الجديد. من ينتقل الجيل الجديد ويتعلم اللغة العربية من هاي المناطق التجارية مثلا، او اللي يتعلمون انجليزي بجامايكا بالمدارس مالتهم اللي تعتبر higher variety of the language، فهذه يسمونها decreolization. Leads at one extreme to a variety that is closer to the external standard model and leaves. At the other extreme, a basic variety with more local Creole features. Between these two extremes may be a range of slightly different varieties. أكو طبعا تفاوتات أخرى with some, many, and fewer Creole features. This range of variety involved after اللي احنا نسميها post Creole continuum اللي هو ما بعد الكريول. So in Jamaica, one speaker may say a Femi book that using the basic Creole variety, and another may put it as is me book using a variety with fewer Creole features. هذه كان ملخص لهذا الشابتر، بس أهم عنصر بس أكد عليه أخاف يعني ممكن ما صارت واضحة. Creolization هو انتقال البيجن إلى كريول، فيسمونها creolization عن طريق جديد وعن طريق بداية توظيفه واستخدامه خارج نطاق التريد أو البزنس. decreolization هو اصطدام الكريول مع الجيل الجديد باللغة التعليمية أو الأكاديمية اللي تعتبر الهاير فرايتي أو الستاندردز. فهذا يصير عندهم decreolization، يبدأ يقلل استخدام اللغة اللي اكتسبها مفردات من الكريول اللي اجتي اصلا من البيجن، ويبدأ يستخدم المودرن ستاندرد اكثر. اوكي، فهذه كانت ملخص بسيط لهذا الفصل، هو مو بسيط يعني مطول، اتمنى يكون استفاديتوا منه. نلتقي بكم شابتر اخر باذن الله. مدرب اللغة كان معكم وليد خالد.